WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I shaved for this one, so you know this one's going to be big. There's purple smoke billowing out of the castle in Owings Mills. We're going to be getting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. I can't wait. I'm putting together a pretty aggressive schedule into April and May because I need some crab cakes and I need some oysters and I need some things. And I need some conversations and I need some politics and I need some spring in my life. The spring in my step, the Maryland Lottery, the instant scratch-offs. It's old school. It's 50th anniversary. I'll be giving these out. You can also get these really cool, like $50 ones, and apparently they're selling the heck out of them, but it's $5 million. You can win five. So John Martin's been telling me about that. Also, our friends at Goodwill. I've got my, is this a Shannon Sharp hat or a Tony Saragusa hat? I'm not sure, Luke. I think a goose when I get the floppy hat that's of this color. Now, if it's orange, of course, I think of beer in summer. But Window Nation, 866- 90 Nation, a way to get them. You buy two, you get two free, 24 months, 0% financing. Luke Jones joins us now. And you know Luke, and I know Luke, and we've all waited for whatever this is because we don't have a solution, but we have some sort of resolution. Never bet against or on Eric DeCosta or try to figure out or read tea leaves as to how this is. I'm utterly convinced now they're going to give him $250 million. He's going to play. I don't know what to think at this point, Luke.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've tried to drive home a lot in our discussions where I feel like there's been so many people that have been convinced about something, right? Whether there were all these teams that were going to give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed deal, whether the Ravens were lowballing him, whether Lamar was doing this or that, and I think the theme of this entire saga has been the unknown, right? I mean, how much of it has been what happened 2 years ago, long before the Deshaun Watson deal was kind of the inflection point of this process, we all presume. So we come to a head as far as the franchise tag deadline. I had talked about this with you even going back to January, even though it wasn't my prediction, and I thought the Ravens would indeed give him the exclusive franchise tag. I said back in January, the question that so many people were missing throughout this decision as far as which tag to use is, what do the Baltimore Ravens want to accomplish from this? We know what Lamar Jackson wants. What do the Baltimore Ravens want? And I think the question always was, are you looking to deal him? And if that's the case, you probably are looking at least, where they were weeks ago, looking at the exclusive tag because
By the way, I'm taking box A. So I am in the camp that.
Are you still in that camp?
They want to move on. They want to maximize value. Okay. I think the internet thought, oh my God, they're going to get Herschel Walker. They're going to get Ricky Williams. They're going to get three. No, I don't think you and I ever thought that. And certainly not. This is not an accomplished quarterback in that way where it's Patrick Mahomes, like guys that have and I know you'll nod, say he's an MVP. You'll go through all that. He is at the end of the year, though. And that would be a knock on anyone. It just would. If you haven't played at the end of your season, the last two seasons, and you want to set records for your quarterback deal, in most cases, if this isn't Lamar Jackson and Steve Bisciotti and Deshaun, if this were just Team X and Team Y over the last 30 years and the guy's been injured, you'd say, dude, I love you and I'll take care of you a little bit, but you got to come play. You got to come play in order for me to give you a 5-year deal. It's different with Lamar with his legs and his value and saying, what's the 26th year of his life going to be versus the 31st year of his life in regard to quarterbacking, in regard to tread on the tire of a guy that unprecedentedly runs into linebackers. That has always made me squeamish. It would make me squeamish if my job depended upon it. And the wild thing that you and I didn't have on our punch card, but we should because we know better, right? What if the owners just colluded and Steve got together and dropped a dime on Arthur Blank and they all just said, we're just all going to agree not to give this kid 300. I mean, because he's missed games, because I remember Bisciotti losing his mind with Sam Bradford, right? The guaranteed money that those cats were getting to walk into the campus was crippling. And I remember Steve talking about it. And Steve had no dog in the hunt. He wasn't a number one overall pick kind of guy that was going to get stuck on that. But I think it was in their room 10 years ago. This was back when Steve used to meet with the media, get together. I have him talking to Gaggles, back of the podium about all of this kind of stuff in regard to suppressing salaries or organizing things in a way that was more distributive to deeds and accomplishments versus you're a number one overall and we're just going to give you $100 million to walk in the door, right? So somewhere in between here. And Luke, we can big ticket this in any way you want, even to your point with Roquan Smith. But this is the biggest, the big tickets. And the NFL's involved in this. And to some degree, there's been some damage of Lamar's reputation, Twitter, the sign, negotiating for like all of that, that would be anti-Lamar. But then there's the, hey, look, he's the best quarterback on the market. They were spending $50 million a year on all the rest of these cats. Why is he being given this bad treatment? And dude, it's Colin Kaepernick all over again, but a little different. You know what I mean? It's what is the value of him? And I see it, you don't see it, and well, we don't see it, and we don't need a quarterback that bad in the NFC South. You know, so I think the first couple of hours were very telling in regard to owners putting their PR out, every Ravens Chad Steele, every PR person putting their thing out, and then the internet going mad. And at some point, there's going to be a settling of he's a really good quarterback. Somebody's going to pay him a lot of money. I think the Ravens, I will take box A. So that's where I am on this.
I see. I'm the exact opposite. I'm more confident now that he's going to stay a Raven because everything you just said. Why would the Ravens relinquish control about where he's going to go? Because now look, your point about potential collusion and look, is the NFLPA going to be able to prove anything? No. I don't think there's any way they're going to
be. Bids, if nobody bids on Lamar Jackson, then the Ravens write the number down, and whatever the number is, that's the number, kid. You know what I mean? Like, this is filthy. I mean, to some degree, if nobody bids on him, it's filthy. It's Kaepernicky. If there are 5 teams in on Lamar Jackson and he's available, but then again,
at the same time, you've spent so much time saying why you wouldn't sign him and why the Ravens should move on from him. So if you're saying that, then
I think he's a high risk proposition for anybody. And I like the kid. I'm not like, I'm fine, but he's one linebacker away, and they all are, right? I mean, we can go back to DeMar Hamlin and everything back to Stingley, right? Like, I get that, but, and I'm not even against guaranteed money for guys that do this job. I would be the lobbyist to say, I've seen the guys with CT. I've spent the week. By the way, it's Brain Injury Awareness Month, Luke. I want to put that in here. We had a great conversation locally about concussions and so I'm not anti-Lamar. I just think every Bisciotti doesn't want to pay him. Every Harbaugh and DaCosta have to say to themselves, if I bring him in here and he gets hurt, I'm losing my job. Now, you could probably say that about any quarterback, but we're going to lose a lot of games if we're going to. And are we currently equipped to bring him in and run that game and do it quick enough for me to keep my job? I keep going back to the egos of these men, which I've been studying a lot lately, Luke. And they all want to keep their job. And one thing about DaCosta and Harbaugh is they have jobs for life in the public perception and maybe in the reality world, right? So they're not afraid of moving on. And I think they've seen the experiment on the inside and they were willing to pay X amount for it. And I have no information on that. I mean, none. But I don't think they should give him away for a 23rd pick in the draft and a 28th pick in the draft, and he goes and makes another place better like Atlanta in a bad division. And like, Eric's not dumb, but I don't think there's nobody that wants to give him $230 million. And that's not a reflection upon Steve. I think that's a reflection upon all of them for all of the collusive, awful, and reasons that, we won't want to talk about here. And the NFLPA wants to scream about, right? There's all of that the calluses that Dennis talks about at Coons Ford, right? There's all of that bakes into this that makes this really caustic. And to your point, if he gets stuck here, man, they're going to have some splaining to do.
Well, I mean, or it becomes Lamar Jackson sees that there isn't that team out there that's going to give him Deshaun Watson fully guaranteed money, and he comes back to the Ravens and says, well, maybe you guys were right, and maybe you do value me the most. I mean, I guess for me, because you've always, over the last couple of months, you've been much more on the train of thought of the Ravens trading him. And I'm just at this point, if there isn't a market for him, I think he's and
Well, that
whether
makes
that's
me dead wrong. If
well,
nobody in the league wants him,
well, and
that's
that's what's
different than what the
that's
internet,
what's but
right?
that's
That's
what it's
different than what the league thought and what the NFLPA and all these people thought.
but that's what's crazy if no one wants him. That's when you look at this and say, come on, this doesn't smell right. Now, any single team, and we talk about this all that, this has been talked about with head coach hiring practices, executive hiring practices, you know, any individual team with any individual candidate or individual quarterback in this case, and in this case, a very unique quarterback for many of the reasons that you stated. I have a higher opinion of Lamar Jackson than you do. I think that's pretty evident in how we've talked about this, but I fully acknowledge elements that are a significant risk, especially now on the heels of a second straight year where he hasn't been healthy to finish a season. But you can go through the list and find individual teams where you say, okay, that doesn't, that makes sense. That's defense. You can defend that position, but when you have so many teams coming out so quickly, and let's be clear, just because team A, B, C, and D say on March 7th that they're not interested in Lamar Jackson, that doesn't actually mean that's going to be the case next week or the week after that. I mean, look at the Cleveland Browns. They were out on Deshaun Watson until ownership stepped in. And let's be clear about this. This isn't an Eric DeCosta decision. This is not a general manager decision for any of these
Well,
teams.
this would go
It's
across
ownership.
sports to say like how Manny Machado wound up in San Diego and the sweepstakes with Korea in the offseason, right? And where any superstar would go, everybody's going to shut their mouth and try to deflate the value because the Falcons want to get him for less, right? In less money and less draft, like in general. And if the Ravens are done with him, then we're going to find out. I mean, I always say that. Like people are, hey, who's Eric going to draft? We're going to find out. Well, I mean, we're going to find out in the next 6 or 7 weeks because if he's back, then they really did love him a lot more than it certainly felt in December when John's holding those press conferences, doing the scarecrow thing, and he's not on the sideline in Cincinnati. Like if this was bargaining all along, I just don't think Steve Bisciotti bargains that way. And I would just be shocked. And I would think that him being his agent thing, Dennis even said this the other day, which I thought was wisdom. He's like, they'll never draft a quarterback without an agent in the first round again because it's just too difficult. It's just, and especially because this kid blossomed. This kid's a flower. This kid's a rose. And it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate all the way around. And I do think and I didn't make this wager, and I should have because I can do it legally now at Perryville on my Barstool. Yeah, I can do all of that. But if I would have wagered, I felt very strongly on Monday that he'd wind up in another uniform. I never thought that they'd be colluding. Who is the media guy that's been kicked out to think that they would ever collude and the Colin Kaepernick thing would pop in, that in the end they want to fight the union? In the end, they want to beat the Players Association, and to kind of always that's the Garden of Eden for them. That's the original sin for them, right? So I guess I didn't think about it in those terms, that the only thing that would make him a Raven would be is if he had nowhere else to go, and the Ravens got him on a discount and said, "See, kid, it's $48 million a year, and it's 4 years, and it's $118 million, or whatever the number is, wherever they are." And it's not like he'd be a pauper. It's not like it would be out of line with Josh Allen or some of those other people. I think the Ravens would put it there, and no problem, because they beat the union doing that. And Steve beats the union doing that. And I think that there's levels of this that go on that even the smartest guys like you and me, or put Peter King or anybody else in there, that we really didn't leave this out as the political play it would become in the first 2 hours, where every media bunkie that's connected to wherever, to whomever, in whatever organization, had a source that said my team's out. I mean, it was astonishing, man. It really was.
Yeah, but again, is that truthful? And it comes back to all it takes is one team. Now, how many teams have the cap space to structure a deal in a manner in which the Ravens would say, we're not matching that, whether it's fully guaranteed or whether it would be a case of, okay, it's not fully guaranteed, but it's structured in a way in which the Ravens would have to make however many player cuts to fit this under the salary cap. And you look at a team like Atlanta, although the Falcons were one of the first teams that leaked out to local reporters that they were out. And I actually was even talking to someone recently, about the combine, there was some conflicting information there, even as far as the Falcons' interest. So
Well, a team
it
like the
wasn't
Falcons,
just
you say, does he make them better? Okay, $50 million,
he
give
makes
them
everyone
draft picks,
better. I
and
mean,
if they like this kid they have even a little bit on the cheap, then and if they
I
stink
guess.
again, Mr. Blank can go into the draft and, draft a, where, because they all think, the owners think differently. The fans want to win yesterday. The players want to win now. The owners, Steve's winning by breathing.
I was going to say
Steve
that.
just gave him $600 million. His franchise is worth $5 billion. Whenever they figure out this Snyder thing and kick his ass out in 3 weeks, like this train, the train rolls on. To quote the great Gary Rossington and Leonard Skinner, train rolls on. And that's why I'm trying to think like Bisciotti in regard to Lamar. Like, we love Lamar at our price in the same way that Ozzie loved every player at his price since they overpaid John Ogden on day one, right?
Right, right. And I mean, you mentioned some of the hurt feelings and all of that. I mean, we forget in this town how sour the Ravens' relationship was with Ray Lewis at a couple different points. Go back to 2005 with the hamstring, and I mean, he was nowhere to be found the second half of the season. I mean, I remember that as being a 22-year-old fan who wasn't paying nearly as close attention as
I remember
I
that as
do
a
now.
37-year-old reporter.
But my point is, at that point, Ray Lewis's future with the Ravens was very much not looking healthy. Let's say whether a trade was going to be imminent or whether a departure was imminent, it certainly wasn't looking healthy. And my goodness, and the conversation you recently played on our airwaves of talking to him in 2009 as he was getting ready to become a free agent. I mean, he became a free agent. I mean, we're talking about Lamar Jackson now having the opportunity, regardless of how it goes, regardless of how many teams ultimately talk to him of talking, the Ravens still have some protection there. Ray was an unrestricted free agent. Now, much different point in his career, different position, different value. We understand all of that. But the point is, they still came back together and there was still kumbaya over the last few years with Ray Lewis, so to speak. So uh,
Dude,
anytime
Eddie
you're
Murray
talking
came
about the
back to the Orioles.
right. But anytime
Right?
you're talking about these especially these franchise tag situations, they can get very contentious. They can get very ugly, and then they're not anymore. Whether it's the team caving or a player finding out the value's not there, typically an agent is very helpful in learning that, and that's why I said all along, even with the notion of trading Lamar Jackson, even if the Ravens had made up their mind that we want to move on from Lamar Jackson, that's why I said to you over and over, that's not a guaranteed to happen because of the challenge of no agent and other teams wanting to talk to Lamar and other teams potentially running into the same problems the Ravens have had with negotiating. And again, this comes back to, I want to be clear because I've said for a while now, this is not a case where the Ravens are at fault or Lamar Jackson is even at fault at the end of the day. Both of these sides are coming from a very fair position. Lamar Jackson looks at Deshaun Watson, and whether you want to say it's an outlier or not, it is a reality, right? That contract exists. It's not pretend. You can say the Browns are idiots, but they're still one of 32 teams. They're still one of 32 ownership groups.
Oh, and by the way,
So,
they can afford it. Let's
and,
start. I
and
just
they
always
can,
want to
sure.
throw that in when it comes
That's
to billionaires.
right, and that's part of it, and that's part of this conversation, and that's where I think it's going to be very difficult for the union to cry collusion and actually have a case to prove it because of that simple fact of escrow and needing to be cash rich. So, but the point is, Lamar has a very fair argument to make that he deserves at least that much. And if you're the Ravens, you're saying, well, if one ownership group, wants to jump off a cliff, that doesn't mean the other 31 owners are obligated to do that from their position. And they would say all the quarterback deals that have occurred since Deshaun Watson, even if they're not players of the caliber of Lamar Jackson, have not been fully guaranteed. So what's the outlier and what's the new standard? That's the argument that they've gone back and forth on to some degree or another. So, I mean, it really does become now a case of waiting at least for a short period of time. I think what's difficult about this with the Ravens and why it still was surprising to me that they went the non-exclusive route is you've now invited Lamar to just wait and wait and wait some more. And he's under no obligation to sign the franchise tag. I mean,
Let's talk.
and that was always
I want to hear, because you were shocked. A lot of people shocked
I was
at the
surprised. I
level.
wouldn't say, I wasn't shocked, but I was
But the
surprised.
issue that I guess we didn't think or talk enough about, and we did, which is their cap position, right? Which
Yeah.
is where you tag him affects cutting 2 players, 3 play. Like, give me your inside school on that because you've thought more about that than I have, quite frankly.
Well, it comes down to this. I mean, the non-exclusive tag is $32.4 million. It now puts the Ravens roughly where they stand right now before making any cuts or contract restructures, which they can always do that. There's a number of guys you can do that with, from Marlon Humphrey to Mark Andrews to even Ronnie Stanley, even though I would be reluctant to try to touch Ronnie Stanley's contract at this point just because of his history.
Well, the only
But
way you can move big money
there are
around is to affect big money. I mean, literally,
right.
right? It's
But
a lot of money.
there are a number of ways for them to create what at this point they're a little over $9 million above the salary cap. Now, they don't need to be in compliance until the 15th, the start of the new league year. So they have, from the time they place the tag on Lamar, 8 days roughly to get compliant.
So
now,
what you're saying is there going to be some text this week from WNST and
there
Baltimore Forward.
could be. I mean, we're not going to send out a text on a contract restructure. We typically don't do that. So there could be a number of restructures, and they could do it that way. It could be something as I don't know if I'd say drastic because I think people have seen this coming, but a release of a Chuck Clark that would save about close to $3.5 million. So you have things you can do of that nature. I mean, Calais Campbell, Eric DaCosta was asked about him in Indy, and he was non-committal in the general sense that he is about any players who are up there in age and up there in cap number wise. So they definitely have some work and maneuverability that's going to go on here in the coming days leading up to the start
Yeah,
of the new
Calais
league
said
year.
he's coming back.
But
They haven't said he's coming back, right?
right. But keep in
Right.
mind, this isn't as simple as you create $9 million in space and then you're good. That's as you're currently constructed. That's without tendering any exclusive rights guys and restricted free agents. I mean, Tyler Huntley's a restricted free agent, for example. I would think you want to bring him back as your backup quarterback unless you're planning on drafting one, which of course that gets into the big picture discussion about Lamar's future.
By the way, I had somebody on Facebook, and it's hilarious to me. Like, it's way more entertaining than my radio show ever was. I went on and saw that somebody was sharing Harbaugh's quotes about Tyler Huntley, about how much he loves Tyler Huntley. Like, and I'm like, okay. It's a day to dream, isn't it?
I mean, I'm sure he likes Tyler Huntley. That doesn't mean that he's going to be their starting quarterback. I mean, that's why one thing I do have to laugh about, and you and I have argued about Lamar and elements of things that you've said that I push back on and vice versa. But one thing that has just been laughable to me is to see people use the Ravens record when Lamar hasn't been on the field as some kind of ammunition that they can't bear to. It's like breaking news. Teams are worse when their starting quarterbacks aren't on the field. Like, I mean, what is that supposed to tell me? I mean, it's bizarre to me. But the point that I always made about that was the fact that there are so many games that the Ravens have played the last 2 years without Lamar Jackson is much more problematic than what the record has been without Lamar Jackson. Anyway, I digress on that. But the point I was making about the cap is you need basically need to make moves that are worth $9 million, just over $9 million in cap savings to get compliant. But that's not even considering. Are you going to try to bring back Marcus Peters? Are you going to try to bring back some restricted free agents? Are you going to try to re-sign some other guys? So the point is they still have a lot of work to do. Now, the exclusive tag number, which is $32.4 million compared to the exclusive, which has not been set yet. That is not set for several more weeks. So it wouldn't have counted this much, but was projected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 million. They would have had to have accounted for that eventually. So things become that much more problematic from a cap standpoint. But one point that I made, and I even mentioned this in my latest 12 Ravens thoughts before the deadline earlier this week at BaltimorePositive.com, was if you're in fact moving on from Lamar Jackson, and again, I'm of the thought now, I'm less convinced that that's going to happen because of where we are now and because of what we're already seeing from teams. Although, again, it takes one team with the determination that they're going to step out of their comfort zone, so to speak, with fully guaranteed money. But I think with with me, it was always, if you are thinking of moving on from Lamar Jackson, then why are you going to worry about keeping Calais Campbell then? I mean, you're not a Super Bowl team, or you're not fancying yourself as a Super Bowl contender anymore, at least for the coming year, unless till you draft your replacement or find your replacement. So, I think the point is, at the end of the day, I didn't think the Ravens would take the risk to be in a position where a team could sign him to an offer sheet that you would, I don't want to say wouldn't be able to match, but would not want to match because of how much it would compromise your cap and your roster. And understanding that if they didn't match it, they would only get 2 first-round picks. But I think the fact that they used the non-exclusive is a sign, a reflection of their confidence in the market, that there is not going to be another team out there that offers Lamar Jackson a deal that they're not willing to match. So that's why I am more of the thought that I'm more inclined to think that Lamar Jackson's going to remain a Baltimore Raven, rather than, I never thought he was gone. I've never felt as strongly about it as you that they were going to trade him. But for me, if you give him the exclusive tag, then both sides dig their heels in even deeper. And it was a case of, well, the Ravens can control where he's going to go. They can broker a deal with team X, and understanding Lamar doesn't have an agent and all the challenges of that. But in this case, and this is why I was an advocate of this idea, at least, even if I wasn't convinced they were going to do it, going back a couple months. But the thought was, all right, Lamar, you want a fully guaranteed deal, or you want more fully guaranteed money than we've offered? And, we've tried to work on this. We've been at this for 2+ years, but a year now since the Watson deal. Go see what you can get. And, it's the Ravens have done this with players before. They did it with Ray Lewis, as I mentioned. For me, this method was a signal of trying to force some action, trying to get something done, something that will force some movement from one side to the other. Okay, let's pretend, let's assume that there are at least going to be a couple teams interested in Lamar Jackson. And the early indication on Tuesday afternoon aside, and collusion talk aside, let's say there's at least a couple teams that are interested. Let's say those teams aren't willing to give Lamar a fully guaranteed deal, but they are willing to give him an offer sheet that is superior to what the Ravens were offering. Lamar offers that, and then the Ravens are put to a choice. Are we going to match this? It's not the Watson deal, but it is a little more total guaranteed money than we were offering. Hey, Lamar was right that his market was a little more than what we were saying, but we still think this is a reasonable deal for keeping our franchise quarterback, who we've won a lot of games with. We'll match it. And then if you do that, great. You've got a deal done.
Well, everybody saves face in that case to some degree.
Yeah. So that's where I'm looking at this, and that's why I'm feeling a little more, a little more confident that Lamar Jackson's going to remain a Raven after Tuesday. And look, that's not a 100% fully confident, because I haven't been fully confident about any aspect of this. I mean, that's why we were talking about this a year ago, and I was just wondering, and it felt off, and it felt like it shouldn't be this difficult if both sides want to continue their relationship, continue a marriage. So I think what's interesting here, what's going to be fascinating here is, and we didn't hear anything from Lamar Jackson on Tuesday. Will we hear anything in terms of a statement or anything like that? Maybe the NFLPA putting out something on his behalf. Who knows? Because we haven't heard from Lamar other than tweets and Instagram posts since a couple days before he hurt his knee against Denver back in early December. But I do think what's interesting here is the personal side to this, the side to this where the Ravens aren't just giving him the franchise tag, but they gave him the non-exclusive at $32.4 million. That, Nestor, $32.4 million is well below what his market value is. He'll never
come to BWI again until that gets fixed.
So, well,
I'm seriously, right? Like, he's never going to play for $32 million.
Well, and that's what's, and you mentioned collusion, you mentioned Colin Kaepernick. How much conviction does Lamar Jackson and, the union, but ultimately it's him, right? I mean, he's 26 years old. He's an adult. He's the one who's made choices of representing himself and not having an agent. And yes, the NFLPA can advise him, and they can try to get him as much as they want to. They can try to get him to keep firm here and dig his heels into the ground. But where's Lamar from a personal standpoint here, as it pertains to the Ravens and now getting the non-exclusive tag and understanding that's less money and understanding that at least the early indications aren't a great sign that there's going to be another team that's out there. Although, again, the Browns came along late in the Watson process and changed everything about that. I mean, it was assumed Watson was going to go elsewhere. The Browns had been ruled out until they weren't anymore. So you never want to dismiss that. But assuming that doesn't happen, is Lamar willing to come back to the table with the Ravens and say, all right, let's talk? And whatever the Ravens were offering, assuming that's still the offer. And I think from a standpoint of, you don't want to embarrass the guy because you have won a lot of games with him and he has been your quarterback.
Well, I think that's a real question if he were to come back here with bad feelings and, $47 million a year and not feeling good about it. Based on what we've seen from this kid, show me the money and like all of that, I don't think he could come back here and play for less than he wanted to play.
What are you basing? Because he held up a sign, though. I mean, what has he done that's been so off-putting?
Well, I think not showing up in Cincinnati was a little weird. Just I think that's the way he is negotiating.
I mean, but I already gave you an example of Ray Lewis doing that back in 2005. I mean, he wasn't around. He tore his hamstring and then he was gone, and there were questions about how hurt he was and all of that. I mean, I remember
Ray Lewis was already going to the Hall of Fame at that point too, and didn't have a statue yet in Miami. So.
I know, but I don't understand why that's relevant.
I think there's fragility.
My point is
because Ray came back and said, "My town, my town." I don't think Lamar's ever felt that way about here. You know what I mean? I think we're dealing with it's not apples and oranges. It's apples and pears, maybe. You know what I mean? But it's still two very different human beings at two different very times. And where Lamar is in getting his money right now and getting this is his chance.
But if no one else is giving him the money, so he's just not going to take it from the Ravens? I mean, my point is, and it's not to compare. My point is, if Ray Lewis can have those types of feelings and there to be an apparent fracture with a town where he has been entrenched for a longer period of time, as you mentioned, and things can end up being fine, I don't see why the Ravens and Lamar Jackson can't be fine. But that was the question I was asking in terms of how willing is Lamar Jackson, how far is he willing to go to, try to get what he wants. But the reality is, if he's out on the open market and no team is willing to give him what he wants, fully acknowledging there's also 2 first-round picks attached to this, then what's he going to do? I mean, is he going to sit out the season? I mean, he could. Theoretically, he could do that, but then he's right back in the same place next year. So that's where I just look at this thing and, I feel, unlike you, I feel more confident now about Lamar Jackson potentially staying and signing for what the Ravens have been offering. We'll see how it plays out.
I don't disagree with you, by the way, but I didn't have collusion and I didn't have no one. And again, it goes back to, and this is an honest assessment for me, that having done this for 30 years, owners got to be on board with a quarterback that runs in the linebackers at the highest price.
Gotten hurt in the pocket each of the last 2 years because you keep saying that, but he's gotten hurt in the pocket. I hear you, but it's just.
Well, turning the team over to this style of offense and saying we're going to win a Super Bowl, and the owner's going to say, well, what have the Ravens done the last 2 years? The last 2 years he's been unavailable to play, and he's gotten hurt, and that's what, and analytics aside, it's just he gets hit. He runs the ball 200 times and needs to do that in order to be effective, and not everybody's going to like that. Not everybody's going to like that.
Does he need to do that as much? Does he need to do that as much to be effective?
Is he that accurate as a pocket passer?
I think he's more accurate than you give him credit for. But this is also why
accurate enough for me to turn my franchise over, put $50 million in him, give 2 or 3 or more first-round draft picks away, and are we in the next 3 years winning a Super Bowl here in Atlanta, Carolina, or
Sure.
are we going to live with what we have, go into the draft, do it that way, and say when we find our Lamar Jackson, we'll give him $50 million. The Ravens found their Lamar Jackson and haven't, and now they've been given scorn on this. But to your point, the next couple of weeks, if nobody steps up, they would have still been the outlier that picked him last in the first round, turned the whole thing over to him, had it be successful, all kept their jobs, right? But
Right.
this is a unique place in that way. It really, really is. And you know this. You go to these combines, you see one guy one year with the Jets thing on, the next year he's Saints. These guys move around and they're all afraid of getting fired and they're all
Yeah.
afraid of risk. It's risk management for all of them. I keep my job if I have my four-string quarterback around here, for the
Well,
next 2 years, maybe, because that's how they're all thinking. John and Eric don't think that way. Mike Tomlin, but a lot of these guys do, man.
but the one thing I will say, I'll go back to this. Signing a player of this caliber and this price range, whatever it's ultimately going to be, whether it's what the Ravens have been offering and he ultimately signs for that, or whether there is that team, that's an ownership decision. I mean, let's be clear. I know and especially in this town, we're sensitive to that because of Peter Angelos and meddling and all of that. Ownership, when you're talking about that kind of a ticket, this isn't signing someone for $10 million a year. This is a 200 to 300 potentially plus $1 million investment that you're making in a player. That's an ownership decision. I mean, in the same way that
Do we want to turn our franchise over to Lamar Jackson? That's really the question,
for another
right?
team, right? And that's where when a couple minutes ago I was confused. I thought you were talking about that from the Ravens' perspective. Another team. I mean, well, and that's the thing. See what you're just saying there. That doesn't that poke holes in the collusion thing then?
Do
I
I
mean,
have other
because you're making it,
options? If I'm in Atlanta or what are my other options other than giving away a
and
draft
that's
and
the other
$200
thing
million
too.
to a guy that runs into linebackers? We're going to have to change everything. Is my coach comfortable with that? Are we built for that? Where are we? Where's our meeting room when he comes in as the anointed one and we give him all this money? He didn't even show up for his teammates in Cincinnati. I can just hear a billionaire saying, "We got other options." I mean, we're not that desperate. We're desperate, but we're not. I mean, we won 5 games last year. We might win 7 next, but we're not desperate. And I
Well, that's
felt the
because
desperation of the Deshaun Watson thing last year. Everybody felt the desperation of those franchises. I do wonder what's changed in 11 months in
well,
regard to that.
right, and that's I mean what you just said. I mean, owners who have that kind of mindset, and look, I've spelled out reasons why I'd be very reluctant to give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed deal. I think that's fair, but owners with that kind of mindset that you just laid out, and I don't think you're wrong. You look at the track record and then you start to see why some of these guys have won nothing and they don't get it and they make lousy decisions and they're not a model organization. So,
Well, the
I mean,
Seahawks made a decision to go with Geno Smith last year. He played so well, they actually had to pay him. They're happy to pay him when he plays well. They're happy to, I
yeah,
mean, you play in January, they're happy to pay you. No matter,
sure,
that's where it is. Luke, we're going to talk a lot about
sure.
this. We're going to have the Maryland Crab
Oh
Cake
yeah,
Tour
it's
back
not
out on the
over.
road. We're not done. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery, their 50th anniversary. I got these really cool instant lottery scratch-offs. I got a bunch of them. Looking forward to giving them out to our listeners, our friends out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, including our friends at Goodwill and in Window Nation as well. 866-90-NATION. You buy 2, you get 2 free. 24 months, 0% financing through the end of the month. Make sure you're taking care of that. And, of course, Dennis is with us on Thursdays, the Coons Ford WNST Tech Service. Luke's got his fingers on the button. And, it's a soap opera now. It's on. Tag, and tag away. We'll have free agency next week. Luke's on the job. Find him at Baltimore Luke at WNST.net. All complaints to him. All praise to me. I'm nasty at WNST.net or Ness at BaltimorePositive.com. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Lamar Jackson. BaltimorePositive.com. Stay with us.